Good morning, everybody. Hello, good day. So, in my never ending attempt to figure out how to be a pro streamer, uh, so I was on Hyper on Thursday for Warhammer, and to call into that, I was on Zoom. Zoom doesn't have video settings, right? So, if you saw me on there, I was kind of desaturated. Somebody said it looked like I was in a Zack Snyder movie. Fair. It's like, okay, I'll figure that out later. So this morning I turned on my whole setup. Yeah, exactly, Aaron. So I turned on my whole setup, and I was playing with. So I have a camera that's going through a capture card into my computer. So I opened a program that came with a capture card to mess with the video settings. And I opened up Zoom. I zoomed my wife, got it to look okay. Bumped up that saturation all the way. It was at 1, made it 100, and it looked fine. So that's fine. So close that program, and then I open Streamlabs, and everything, all the settings are completely out of whack in Streamlabs. Now you can change things in Streamlabs. Oh my goodness! Thank you so much, Darrow. Exactly. It's and now like I'm playing with the sliders and I can't get it to. I mean, it's not terrible, but I don't know, it just looks something about the colors do not look exactly right. I don't know. Whatever. And it's just so frustrating that you change things in one program and then you open up a different program and that's changed too, and this is fine. This is all fine. Welcome, everybody. Hopefully everyone is having a great day. Not so much frustrations. We're back. This was wow. A lot of things have happened since the last time I was on stream. A lot of them not so good. I'm a little yellow. Yeah, I don't know. Oh well. Yeah. World events, big U.S. events, things happening. It was Rosh Hashanah this weekend, which was nice, hanging out with my family. Yeah, we had a big earthquake. That was annoying. Actually, I'm looking around. A fair amount of toys fell down. I gotta fix some shelf divers. It's a big one. 4.9, 4.8. They keep revising the exact estimate, but it's pretty close to us. Yes, but it's the beginning of a new week. We're gonna have a good one. Was it melted? No. Dear God, no, because a lot of toys have fallen down over the years. But it's fine. So what are we here to do on a beautiful Monday morning? We are going to continue with Ovid's Metamorphoses. Started this on Thursday. We're not that far in just yet because we also figured out. We also finished Epic of Gilgamesh. No, Rabbit Wombat, I can't wait to check out your streams. Hopefully you have better luck with color than I do. Yeah, so Ovid, Roman poet. So we're dealing with Roman mythology, which again is mostly based on Greek mythology, and then they added some of their own stuff. They changed the names, which is important. Yeah, Pandar, that's true. Don't use a camera, have no camera issues. That's a good philosophy. Yeah, so the names are going to be different, right? Instead of Zeus, we're going to have Jupiter or Jove. Some of the names are the same. Apollo is the same both in Greek and Roman. But yeah, when we come to gods and things like that, I'll point it out. And Ovid's idea for the Metamorphoses, which is a very long poetic work. It's not exactly an epic poem. It doesn't really fit into a specific box because it has elements of epic poetry. It has elements of essentially like a theogony or a cosmology. But anyway, Ovid's point was, if you look at all of these stories, all of these myths, and even running up into recent Roman history, that you can sort of boil everything down to everything is about change, things changing, the gods changing, people, the earth changing, all of basically change. Change is important. Can be good or bad, but everything is about change. So we're going to see that's the overall theme throughout the entire work, which again is why it's called the Metamorphoses, things that are changing. And again, it does start in the beginning. We read about the creation of the world. Before the ocean was, or earth or heaven, nature was all alike, a shapeless chaos. Right? So we're going to see now we've talked about Greek mythology, Norse mythology. We've done some Mesopotamian stuff with Epic of Gilgamesh. We're definitely going to see similarities between all of these things. Yes, those snakes. That snake got the good stuff. We're also going to see a lot of stories in here, especially in the first half of the book, that are explanations for why things are in the world, right? We've seen that a million times before in mythology already, but Ovid is going to... Sometimes Ovid includes stories that are like, well, what does this have to do with anything? And then there's like a tiny little detail about something changing, or something changing color or shape, and it's like, okay, that's why it's in there. So the idea of change is both a sort of like a meta narrative, especially when we get to the end of this, which has to do with real history, and then also sort of like something that he plays with throughout the book. But you'll see. Yes. Okay, so we're still in book 1. And again, it's just divided up into small books, but that doesn't really matter. So we just heard about Lycaon. So Jupiter is hanging out with people in the ancient times, and he hangs out with this dude named Lycaon. Lycaon seems pretty cool, but Jupiter goes to his house in disguise as an old man. This is another big theme in mythologies, like we've talked about. Lycaon invites him into his house, says, "Hey, come on in, everything's great," but then plays a trick on him. First of all, other people are like, maybe that's a god, maybe you should like really take care of him. And Lycaon said, I'm going to test that. I'm going to try to murder him while he's sleeping, because that'll tell us if he's a god or not. And then he actually cuts up another human being and tries to serve it to him to eat. Jupiter sees through his rascal ways and then turns Lycaon into a werewolf, the first werewolf. And then Jupiter is about to use his thunderbolts to destroy humankind, but everyone's like, hold on. That'll burn up everything. We don't want that. Maybe something else would be better. So we get into the section called The Flood. Again, we've already seen several floods in other mythologies. And so let's see. So I'm going to skip through this part a little bit, but essentially Jupiter goes and talks to the winds and gets them to rise up. Halo has the flood, that's right. the good old mythological flood in Halo. And then Neptune comes. So we have Neptune instead of Poseidon. Same guy, different name. And Neptune called his rivers all and told them very briefly to loose their violence, open their houses, pour over embankments, let the river horses run wild as ever they would. And they obeyed him. His trident struck the shuddering earth. It opened way for the rush of waters. The leaping rivers flood over the great plains. Not only orchards are swept away, not only grain and cattle, not only men and houses, but altars, temples, and shrines with holy fires. If any building stands firm, the waves keep rising over its rooftop. Its towers are underwater, and land and ocean are all alike, and everything is ocean, an ocean with no shoreline. Some poor fellow seizes a hilltop, another in a dinghy rows where he used to plow, and one goes sailing over his fields of grain or over the chimney of what once was his cottage. Someone catches fish in the top of an elm tree, or an anchor drags in green meadowland, or the curved keel brushes grape arbors underwater. Ugly sea cows float where the slender she-goats used to nibble the tender grass, and the Nereids come swimming with curious wonder, looking underwater at houses, cities, parks, and groves. Oh, thank you so much for the continuing subscription. 6 months. Awesome. Thank you so much. The dolphins invade the woods and brush against oak trees. The wolf swims with the lamb. Lion and tiger are borne along together. The wild boar finds all his strength is useless, and the deer cannot outspeed that torrent. Wandering birds look long in vain for landing place, and tumble exhausted into the sea. The deep's great license has buried all the hills, and new waves thunder against the mountain tops. The flood has taken all things, or nearly all, and those whom water by chance has spared, starvation slowly conquers. Yeah, so everything is just mashed together. They're animals where they shouldn't be, and it's chaos. Bad news. Ugly sea cows. Now we know sea cows as referring to manatees or dugongs. There's something else that's called sea cows, but I wonder exactly what Ovid is referring to, because I don't know what. I don't know exactly what he's referring to. I'd have to look up the Latin. I should look up the Latin. I will make a note to look up the Latin, because I'd love to know exactly what that word is right here. Sea cow. This is around line 290 or so. I don't know if I have the text of Ovid in Latin here. It's online though. Tufts University has a massive database, an online database of ancient works in the original languages, in translation. There's a lookup tool for every single word. It's amazing. It's fantastic. Okay, so the flood has happened, and it says all things or nearly all have been conquered by water or starvation. And then we get into the story of Deucalion and Pyrrha. Phocus, a fertile land where, while there was land, marked off Otian from Boeotian fields. It's a places in Greece. It was ocean now, a plain of sudden waters. There Mount Parnassus lifts its twin peaks skyward, high, steep, cloud-piercing. And Deucalion came there, rowing his wife. There was no other... in a rowboat with his wife. He's not like riding her in the water and rowing. There was no other land. The sea had drowned it all. And here they worshipped first the Corycian nymphs and native powers, then Themis, oracle and fate revealer. There was no better man than this Deucalion, no one more fond of right, and there was no woman more scrupulously reverent than Pyrrha. So when Jove saw the world was one great ocean, only one woman left of all those thousands, and only one man left of all those thousands, both innocent and worshipful, he parted the clouds, turned loose the north wind, swept them off, showed earth to heaven again, and sky to land. And the sea's anger dwindled, and King Neptune put down his trident, calmed the waves, and Triton, summoned from far down under, with his shoulders barnacle strewn, loomed up above the waters, the blue-green sea god whose resounding horn is heard from shore to shore. Wet-bearded, Triton set lip to that great shell as Neptune ordered, sounding retreat, and all the lands and waters heard and obeyed. The sea has shores, the rivers, still running high, have channels, the floods dwindle, hilltops are seen again. The trees long buried rise with their leaves still muddied. The world returns. So again, there are only two survivors that we hear of, at least at this point, Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha, and we hear that they are fine people. Hey Keen, welcome. Deucalion saw that world all desolation, all emptiness, all silence, and his tears rose as he spoke to Pyrrha. "Oh, my wife, the only woman now on all this earth, my consort and my cousin, and my partner in these immediate dangers. Look! Of all the lands to east or west, we two alone are all the population. Ocean holds everything else. Our foothold, our assurance, are small as they can be. The clouds still frightful. I guess they're cousins also? Okay. Poor woman! Well, we are not alone. Suppose you had been. How would you bear your fear? Who would console your grief? My wife, believe me, had the sea taken you, I would have followed. If only I had the power, I would restore the nations as my father did, bring clay to life with breathing. As it is, we two are all the human race, so heaven has willed it, samples of men, mere specimens. They wept and prayed together, and having wept and prayed, resolved to make petition to the goddess to seek her aid through oracles. Together they went to the river water, the stream Cephisus, still far from clear, but flowing down its channel, and they took river water, sprinkled their foreheads, sprinkled their garments, and they turned their steps to the temple of the goddess, where the altars stood with fires gone dead, and ugly moss stained pediment and column. At the stairs they both fell prone, kissed the chill stone in prayer. If the gods' anger ever listens to righteous prayers, O Themis, we implore you, tell us by what device our wreck and ruin may be repaired. Bring aid, most gentle goddess, to sunken circumstance. Okay, so they're praying to the goddess Themis, and Themis hears them. Themis heard them and gave this oracle. Go from the temple, cover your heads, loosen your robes, and throw your mother's bones behind you. Dumb, they stood in blank amazement. A long silence, broken by Pyrrha finally. She would not do it. With trembling lips she prays whatever pardon her disobedience might merit. But this outrage she dare not risk. Insult her mother's spirit by throwing her bones around? In utter darkness they voice the cryptic saying over and over. What can it mean? They wonder. At last Deucalion finds the way out. I might be wrong, but surely the holy oracles would never counsel a guilty act. The earth is our great mother, and I suppose those bones the goddess mentions are the stones of earth. The order means to throw them, the stones, behind us. See, Deucalion, not only is he a good man, he's smart. He can figure out this riddle. She was still uncertain, and he by no means sure, and both distrustful of that command from heaven. But what damage, what harm could there be in trying? They descended, covered their heads, loosened their garments, threw the stones behind them as the goddess ordered. The stones, who would believe it, had we not the unimpeachable witness of tradition, began to lose their hardness, to soften slowly, to take on form, to grow in size a little, become less rough, to look like human beings, or anyway as much as like human beings statues do, when the sculptor is only starting, images half blocked out. The earthy portion, damp with some moisture, turned to flesh. The solid was bone. The veins were as they always had been. The stones the man had thrown turned into men. The stones the woman threw turned into women, such being the will of God. Hence we derive the hardness that we have, and our endurance gives proof of what we have come from. So Deucalion and Pyrrha pick up a bunch of rocks, the bones of their mother, the bones of earth, throw them over their shoulders, and they turn into new humankind. Yeah, I suppose they would have, but they would have to go back to their homeland to dig up their mothers. Yes, and so that is where, so we get the metamorphosis, the change of these rocks into people, and these will repopulate the earth. Now, you may be thinking, well, humans are all fine and dandy, but what about us? We heard about all these other animals dying. Other forms of life came into being, generated out of the earth. The sun burnt off the dampness. Heat made the slimy marshes swell as seed swells in a mother's womb to shape and substance. So new forms came to life. When the Nile River floods and recedes and the mud is warmed by sunshine, men turning over the earth find living things, and some not living, but nearly so, imperfect, on the verge of life. and often the same substance is part alive, part only clay. So this ancient old-timey biology lesson. When moisture unites with heat, life is conceived. All things come from this union. Fire may fight with water, but heat and moisture generate all things, their discord being productive. So when earth, after that flood, still muddy, took the heat, felt the warm fire of sunlight, she conceived, brought forth, after their fashion, all the creatures, some old, some strange and monstrous. One, for instance, she bore unwanted, a gigantic serpent, Python by name, whom the new people dreaded, a huge bulk on the mountainside. Apollo, god of the glittering bow, took a long time to bring him down, with arrow after arrow he had never used before except in hunting deer and skipping goats. Out of the quiver sped arrows by the 1,000, till the monster, dying, poured poisonous blood on those black wounds. In memory of this, the sacred games called Pythian were established, and Apollo ordained for all young winners in the races, on foot or chariot, for victorious fighters the crown of oak. That was before the laurel. That was before Apollo wreathed his forehead with garlands from that tree or any other. So essentially what we're seeing here is Ovid tries to have transitions between his stories. Some are more natural and obvious than others. But, it's got to go through. Oh, Deucalion was in Teen Wolf. Interesting. Yeah, Deucalion's not a name that we see used in a lot of other things, but it pops up from time to time. So we have Deucalion and Pyrrha repopulating the earth with people. We have the earth, the dampness of earth mixed with heat from the sun, creating other animal life, animal and vegetation. But among all those things, there's a giant serpent that comes about, and Apollo flies down and has to kill it. And then it talks a little bit about Apollo, blah, blah, blah. There were sacred games that were started to honor Apollo's killing of the monster. And as part of the victory celebrations, people would get a wreath. And this was before the laurel. And then we're going to get the story of Apollo and Daphne. We don't talk about this often. I don't really mention it. It's probably pretty obvious, but what the hell? I should say there is content warning for all of these ancient myths with regards to, you name it, it's kind of in there. Cannibalism, rape, murder, incest, suicide, torture. Those are just off the top of my head. So we will be seeing things like that throughout, and all the other stuff. Yeah, it's ancient stories. It's chock full of all those things. So anyway, that's all out there. If you ever have any questions, or if there's a topic that is particularly sensitive to you, let me know, and I'll try to look ahead and figure out what segments you may want to avoid. I can try that, but it's not all fun and games in ancient myth, for sure. And one of those is here in the story of Apollo and Daphne. Now, the first girl Apollo loved was Daphne, whose father was the river god Peneus, and this was no blind chance, but Cupid's malice. Now, Cupid in Roman mythology, Cupid is the Roman version of Eros, the son of Aphrodite in Greek mythology. So a little bit of a different view. And this is not Cupid like we think of in the much later European tradition of like the kindly cherub. Cupid is much more very mischievous, is used by the other gods to inflict usually almost always sorrow upon someone else, and usually the people he interacts with end up in a worse place than when they started, to put it mildly. So Apollo, with pride and glory still upon him over the python slain, saw Cupid bending his tight-strung little bow. Oh, silly youngster. Hold on 1 second here. Oh, silly youngster, he said, what are you doing with such weapons? Those are for grown-ups. The bow is for my shoulders. I never fail in wounding beast or mortal, and not so long ago I slew the python with countless darts. His bloated body covered acre on endless acre, and I slew him. The torch, my boy, is enough for you to play with, to get the love fires burning. Do not meddle with honors that are mine. So essentially, Apollo is the god of archery, and so he sees this little Cupid guy running around with his little bow. He's like, come on, dude. Archery's my thing. Why don't you go play with something else? And Cupid answered, your bow shoots everything, Apollo, maybe, but mine will fix you. You are far above all creatures living, and by just that distance your glory less than mine. He shook his wings, soared high, came down to the shadows of Parnassus, drew from his quiver different kinds of arrows, one causing love, golden and sharp and gleaming, the other blunt and tipped with lead, and serving to drive all love away. And this blunt arrow he used on Daphne. But first he fired the other, the sharp and golden shaft, piercing Apollo through bones, through marrow, and at once he loved, and she at once fled from the name of lover, rejoicing in the woodland hiding places and spoils of beasts which she had taken captive, a rival of Diana, virgin goddess. She had many suitors, but she scorned them all, wanting no part of any man. She traveled the pathless groves, and had no care whatever for husband, love, or marriage. Her father often said, daughter, give me a son-in-law, and daughter, give me some grandsons. But the marriage torches were something hateful, criminal to Daphne, and so she would blush, and put her arms around him and coax him, let me be a virgin always. Diana's father said she might. Dear father, please. And again, the idea of the father has complete control of whether or not a daughter is going to be getting married. He yielded, but her beauty kept arguing against her prayer. Apollo loves at first sight. He wants to marry Daphne. He hopes for what he wants. All wishful thinking is fooled by his own oracles. As stubble burns when the grain is harvested, as hedges catch fire from torches that a passerby has brought too near, or left behind in the morning, so the god burned with all his heart, and burning nourished that futile love of his by hoping. He sees the long hair hanging down her neck, uncared for, says, but what if it were combed? He gazes at her eyes, they shine like stars. He gazes at her lips, and knows that gazing is not enough. He marvels at her fingers, her hands, her wrists, her arms, bare to the shoulder, and what he does not see he thinks is better. But still she flees him, swifter than the wind, and when he calls, she does not even listen. Don't run away, dear nymph, daughter of Peneus, don't run away. I am no enemy, only your follower. Don't run away. The lamb flees from the wolf, the deer, the lion, the dove on trembling wing flees from the eagle. All creatures flee their foes, but I, who follow, am not a foe at all. Love makes me follow, unhappy fellow that I am, and fearful you may fall down, perhaps, or have the briars make scratches on those lovely legs. Unworthy to be hurt so, and I would be the reason. The ground is rough here, run a little slower, and I will run, I promise, a little slower. Or wait a minute, be a little curious, just who it is you charm. I am no shepherd, no mountain dweller. I am not a plough-boy, uncouth and stinking of cattle. You foolish girl, you don't know who it is you run from. That must be why you run. I am Lord of Delphi, and Tenedos and Claros and Patara. Jove is my father. I am the revealer of present, past, and future. Through my power the lyre and song make harmony. My arrow is sure in aim, and there is only one arrow surer, the one that wounds my heart. The power of healing is my discovery. I am called the healer throughout the world. All herbs are subject to me. Alas for me, love is incurable without any herb, or with any herb. The arts which cure the others do me, their lord, no good. Yeah, I mean, to give him some credit, I suppose, in the story, Apollo is actually trying to woo her with words and not merely take her by force, at least at the beginning. He would have said much more than this, but Daphne, frightened, left him with many words unsaid, and she was lovely even in flight, her limbs bare in the wind, her garments fluttering, and her soft hair streaming, more beautiful than ever. But Apollo, too young a god to waste his time in coaxing, came following fast. When a hound starts a rabbit in an open field, one runs for game, for one's safety. He has her, or thinks he has, and she is doubtful whether she's caught or not. So close the margin. So ran the god and girl, one swift in hope, the other in terror. But he ran more swiftly, borne on the wings of love, gave her no rest, shadowed her shoulder, breathed on her streaming hair. Her strength was gone, worn out by the long effort of the long flight. She was deathly pale, and seeing the river of her father, cried, "Oh, help me, if there is any power in the rivers! Change and destroy the body which has given too much delight." And hardly had she finished, when her limbs grew numb and heavy, her soft breasts were closed with delicate bark, her hair was leaves, her arms were branches, and her speedy feet rooted and held, and her head became a tree-top, everything gone except her grace, her shining. Apollo loved her still. He placed his hand where he had hoped, and felt the heart still beating under the bark, and he embraced the branches as if they were still limbs, and kissed the wood, and the wood shrank from his kisses, and the god exclaimed, "Since you can never be my bride, my tree at least you shall be. Let the laurel adorn henceforth my hair, my lyre, my quiver. Let Roman victors, in the long procession, wear laurel wreaths for triumph and ovation. Beside Augustus's portals, let the laurel guard and watch over the oak. And as my head is always youthful, let the laurel always be green and shining." He said no more. The laurel, stirring, seemed to consent, to be saying yes. So that is the story of Apollo and Daphne. A little creepy? Yes. Now here, Ovid is going to shy away from some of the more explicit, violent details in some of these stories. A lot creepy. In some other versions of this story, Apollo flat out rapes Daphne. It very much depends on the story and the era. But here she runs away and she turns into a tree, right? The laurel tree. And then Apollo is like, "Well, I love you so much. I love your tree." And is all over that tree and says that, yes, I'm going to use, essentially, this is the background story for why Apollo uses the laurel for all of his symbols, and why things that are related to Apollo later on will use that. So why people have laurel wreaths, why they wear them for certain victories and things, and that's the reason. And again, we get a really good change in this story. Poor Daphne turning into a tree. So then we get a little thing here about some other nymphs, other waters, and other woods, and then we hear about somebody coming who's very unhappy, mourning a daughter lost. Her name was Io, who might, for all he knew, be dead or living. But since he cannot find her anywhere, he thinks she must be nowhere, and his sorrow fears for the worst. So now we get into the story of Jove, Jupiter, and Io. Jove had seen Io coming from the river of her father and had spoken, "O maiden, worthy of the love of Jove, and sure to make some lover happy in bed, come to the shade of these deep woods." He showed them. "Come to the shade. The sun is hot and burning. No beasts will hurt you there. I will go with you. If a god is at your side, you will walk safely in the very deepest woods. I am a god, and no plebeian godling either, but the holder of heaven's scepter, hurler of the thunder. Oh, do not flee me." She had fled already, leaving Lyrcaea's plains and Lerna's meadows, when the god hid the lands in murk and darkness and stayed her flight and took her. So Jupiter, the Roman version of Zeus, just as lusty, will sleep with anything on 2 legs, 4 legs, wings, whatever you name it. Pretty much gonna have sex with everything. Sometimes change his form into other people, other creatures, in order to do so. And he sees this woman named Io and is all over Io. Meanwhile, Juno looked down on Argos. What could those clouds be doing in the bright light of day? So remember, Jupiter is pursuing Io. She's running, so Jupiter brings a cloud cover to hide her and block her way. And Juno, who is Jupiter's wife, is like, "What's going on down there? There are clouds suddenly forming over one part of the land. What could be happening?" They were not mists rising from rivers or damp ground. She wondered, took a quick look around to see her husband or see where he might be. She knew his cheating. So when she did not find him in the heavens, she said, "I am either wrong or being wronged." Came gliding down from heaven, stood on earth, broke up the clouds. But Jove, ahead of time, could tell that she was coming. He changed Io into a heifer, white and shining, lovely even in altered form, and even Juno looked on, though hating to, with admiration, and asked whom she belonged to, from what pasture, as if she did not know. And Jove, the liar, to put a stop to questions, said she had sprung up out of the earth, full grown. And when Juno asked him, could I have her as a present? What could he do? To keep his love away was surely cruel, to keep her most suspicious. Shame on one side says, give her up, and love says, don't. And shame might have been beaten by love's argument. But then, if he refused his wife the heifer, so slight a present, if he should refuse it, Juno might think perhaps it was no heifer, when indeed, of course, it is not. Yeah, so Juno's like, oh, what's going on here? You're just hanging out with this really strangely pretty cow? Why don't you give her to me? I'll take care of her. She'll be like a present. Jupiter's like, crap. Now I can't have sex with that cow. Her rival thus disposed of, still the goddess did not at once abandon all suspicion. Afraid of Jove and worried over his cheating, she turned her over to the keeping of Argus, who had 100 eyes. 2 at a time, no more than 2 would ever close in slumber. The rest kept watch. So now this is a cool part of the story. Again, that goes back to the Greek. But Juno here makes use of a creature of the gods called Argus. And again, Argus is he's some sort of creature that has 100 eyes all over his body. And at any given time, only 2 of them are closed. So he's the perfect watchman to guard over Io. No matter how he stood, which way he turned, he always looked at Io, always had Io in sight. He let her graze by daylight, but at sundown locked her in, hobbled and haltered. She would feed on leaves and bitter grasses, and her couch, poor creature, was ground, not always grassy, and the water she drank was muddy often. When she wanted to reach toward Argus her imploring arms, she had no arms to reach with. When she tried to plead, she only lowed, moo, and her own voice filled her with terror. When she came to the river, her father's, where she used to play, and saw, reflected in the stream, her jaws and horns, she fled in panic. None of her sisters knew her, and Inachus, her father, did not know her, but following them, she let them pet and praise her. Poor cow. Old Inachus pulled grass and gave it to her, and she licked his hand and tried to give it kisses, could not restrain her tears. If she could talk, she would ask for help and tell her name in sorrow, but as it was, all she could do was furrow the dust with one forefoot and make an I, and then an O beside it, spelling her name, telling the story of her changed condition. Now, how sad is that? She's a cow. She can't speak. She can't reach out her hand. So all she can do is try to use her hoof to write her own name in the dirt. Her father knew her. It worked. Cried, "Alas for me!" Clung to her horns and snowy neck, poor heifer, crying, "Alas for me! I have sought you, daughter, all over the world. And now that I have found you, I have found a greater grief. You do not answer, and what you think is sighing comes out mooing. All the while I, in my ignorance, counted on marriage for you, wanting first a son, then later grandsons. Now your mate must be selected from some herd, your son a bullock. Not even death can end my heavy sorrow. It hurts to be a god. The door of death, shut in my face, prolongs my grief forever." Interesting little tidbit there, that grief is worse for a god because he can't die, essentially. There's no way out from my grief because I can never die. That's fair, I guess. And both of them were weeping, but their guardian, Argus the star-eyed, drove her from her father to different pasture land and sat there watching, perched on a mountaintop above the valley. Jove could not bear her sorrows any longer. He called his son, born of the shining Pleiad, and told him, "Kill Argus." And Mercury, who is Hermes, Mercury came flying on winged sandals, wearing the magic helmet, bearing the sleep-producing wand, and lighted on earth, and put aside the wings and helmet, keeping the wand. With this he plays the shepherd across the pathless countryside. A driver of goats collected somewhere, and he goes playing a little tune on a pipe of reeds. And this new sound is wonderful to Argus. "Whoever you are, come here and sit beside me," he says. "This rock is in the shade, the grass is nowhere any better. It's always greener on this side." And Mercury joins him, whiling the time away with conversation and soothing little melodies. And Argus has a hard fight with drowsiness. His eyes, some of them close, but some of them stay open. To keep himself awake by listening, he asks about the pipe of reeds. How was it this new invention came about? So now we're going to get a story within a story, both of them having to do with change. And the god is going to talk about, the god Mercury is going to talk about the god Pan. Let's see. On the mountain slopes of cool Arcadia, a woodland nymph once lived with many suitors, and her name was Syrinx. Let me look that out. Syrinx. More than once the satyrs chased her, and so did other gods of field or woodland, but always she escaped them. Virgin always, as she aspired to be, one like Diana. Like her in dress and calling, though her bow was made of horn, not gold, but even so she might sometimes be taken for the goddess. Excuse me. Pan, with a wreath of pine around his temples, once saw her coming back from Mount Lycaeus, and said, and Mercury broke off the story, and then went on to tell what Pan had told her, how she said no, and fled through pathless places until she came to Ladon's river, flowing peaceful along the sandy banks, whose water halted her flight, and she implored her sisters to change her form And so when Pan had caught her, and thought he held a nymph, it was only reeds that yielded in his arms. And while he sighed, the soft air stirring in the reeds made also the echo of a sigh. Touched by this marvel, charmed by the sweetness of the tone, he murmured, "This much I have," and took the reeds, and bound them with wax, a tall and shorter one together, and called them syrinx still. So again, we have a story that is very similar to the story that we just heard of Apollo and Daphne. There's a lovely maiden named Syrinx. She wants to remain a virgin, doesn't want to get married, and is pursued by gods. Here, in this case, Pan, a woodland god, a god of wildness and growing things, stuff like that. Pan chases after her. Syrinx pleads to the other nymphs and the gods, essentially, I don't want to be raped. I want to remain a virgin, and let me have anything that can keep that. So she's changed into reeds. Pan comes across these reeds, like, well, I didn't get the girl, but these reeds are interesting. And then he sighs, and the sighing goes through the reeds and makes an interesting sound. And it's like, hey, I'll take this. This will be a substitute for that lady that I tried to grab. And that's how Pan got his reeds, through the changing of Syrinx. And Mercury might have told more, but all the eyes of Argus he saw had closed. And he made the slumber deeper with movements of the wand. And then he struck the nodding head just where it joins the shoulder, severed it with the curving blade, and sent it bloody and rolling over the rocks. So Argus lay low, and all the light in all those eyes went out forever. 100 eyes, one darkness. And Juno took the eyes and fastened them on the feathers of a bird of hers, the peacock, so that the peacock's tail is spread with jewels. And Juno, very angry, sent a fury to harass Io, to drive her mad with terror, in flight all over the world. At last, a river halted her flight, the Nile, and when she came there, she knelt beside the stream, lifted her head, the only gesture she could make of praying, and seemed, with groans and tears and mournful lowing, to voice complaint to Jove, to end her sorrows, and he was moved to pity. Embracing Juno, he begged her, "End this punishment. Hereafter, Io, I swear, will never cause you anguish." That's a lie. And what he swore he called the Styx to witness, and Juno was appeased. Io became what once she was again. The bristles vanish, the horns are gone, the great round eyes grow smaller, the gaping jaws are narrower, the shoulders return. She has hands again, and toes and fingers. The only sign of the heifer is the whiteness. She stands erect, a nymph again, still fearful that speech may still be mooing, but she tries, and little by little gains back the use of language. Now people robed in linen pay her homage, a very goddess, and a son is born, named Epaphus, the seed of Jove. His temples are found beside his mother's in many cities. His boon companion was young Phaethon, son of the sun god, given to speaking proudly, boasting about his parentage, till one day Epaphus said, "You are a silly fellow, believing every word your mother tells you, and all swelled up about your phony father." Phaethon flushed, made no retort, but carried the insult to his mother, the nymph Clymene, and told her, "Mother, to make it all the worse, there was nothing I could answer back. I tell you it is shameful for a fellow with any spirit, and I think I have plenty, to have to listen to such insulting slanders and have no answer. Give me some proof that my father was the sun god, really and truly." He put his arms around her, pleading, imploring in his own name, his brothers, his married sisters, for complete assurance. Clymene, moved by her son's prayers, or maybe by anger at her damaged reputation, stretched out both arms to heaven, raised her eyes to the bright sun, and cried, "By that bright splendor which hears and sees us both, I swear, my son, you are his son too, the son of that great presence whom you behold with me, the radiant ruler of all the world. If I am lying to you, may I never see his light again. This day be the last time I ever look upon him. And you can find his house with no great trouble. His rising is not far from here. Go thither, ask him yourself. And Phaethon, delighted, already imagining himself in heaven, crosses beyond his own frontiers to India, the nearest land to the starry fires of heaven, and comes exulting to his father's palace. So that is the end of book 1. It sort of introduces the start of a story that we're going to pick up immediately in book 2, and that is the sad, tragic tale of one young Phaethon, son of a sun god. So the Io story is super, super sad. As are a lot of the stories when Jupiter sets his sights on a mortal woman. Things don't typically end up well for them. Sometimes, but a lot of times not so much. So Io was obviously, we say that Metamorphoses is she was changed into a cow. She was turned back. Within the story, we also have the sub-story of Pan chasing Syrinx, turned into reeds. And then, in turn, Pan turns the reeds into a musical instrument. So we get sort of a double transformation there. And then we are seeing that it's leading us directly into the story of Phaethon, which will be the start of book 2. For anyone who is lurking, are these stories interesting? Are you digging this kind of stuff? Because are there no happy tales? There are some. There are some happy tales. Some transformations are for the better. A couple of them. Some of them. I'm trying to think of some. So coming up here in book 2, we're gonna hear, like I said, we're gonna start with Phaethon, not a happy story. Sorry, the Raven. Not sure which one that one is. Ooh, Europa. Not a lot of happy stories here. The concept was happy, and yeah, that's true. And yeah, so ancient people, they didn't really look at interacting with gods as a good thing. You worship a god, you hope that no gods are angry with you. But yeah, actually interacting with gods, that's something to be afraid of. You don't want to get too mixed up in that world. It's hard to understand the gods, to know what they want. So yeah, that's typically not a good thing to happen. Let's see. Yeah, so poor Phaethon, he grows up. He's a young boy, and his mother always tells him, "Your dad is the sun god. That's the sun that you see every day. That's your dad. He's riding in his chariot, crossing the sky. You're the son of a god. You're special. You're better than everybody else." And so, of course, Phaethon tells his friends that. And they start making fun of him. Your dad is no god. What are you talking about? So one day he comes to his mother begging her, "Please, is there some proof? You keep telling me this. Everybody makes fun of me." Yeah. And so she tells him, "Well, I mean, you could go to his house. It's not that hard to find. You just go follow where the sun rises and you'll end up there." So he does. He ends up in India, of all places. And we get book 2, the story of Phaethon. One thing that I will try to do a better job of is some of these stories are pretty short. Some of them are much longer. This Phaethon story is actually one of the longer ones that we've seen thus far, and it's kind of hard to, without going through the text line by line ahead of time, it's hard to be able to see where the important parts are to read. So I know I've said I don't want to read every line because it'll take a very long time to get through the whole book, even though I think it is really good and really fun. So I'll try to do a better job of identifying like which parts to read and which parts I can skip. So hopefully that'll help. But there's some cool stuff here. So I'll read. We'll get it started on the Phaethon story. I don't think we'll finish it. We'll save the ending for Thursday. The royal palace of the sun rose high on lofty columns, bright with flashing gold, with bronze that glowed like fire, and ivory crowned the gables, and the double folding doors were radiant with silver. Manner there had conquered matter, for the artist Vulcan, Hephaestus, carved in relief the earth-encircling waters, the wheel of earth, the overarching skies. The sea holds blue-green gods, resounding Triton, Proteus, who always changes, and Aegeon, gripping the backs of whales. The sea nymph Doris and all her daughters swimming, some and others sitting on sea-wet rocks, their green hair drying, all others riding fishes. All the sea-girls seem different, but alike, as sisters ought to. And the land has men and cities, beasts and forests, rivers and nymphs and woodland gods. Above them the image of the shining sky is fashioned, 6 of the zodiac symbols on the right, 6 on the left. And here Clymene's son came climbing up the stairway to the palace, entered the palace which might be his father's, turned toward the face that might have been his father's, and stopped far off. He could not bear that radiance. Clothed in a robe of crimson, there was Phoebus, high on the throne, with brightest emeralds gleaming. To left and right the days, the months, the years, the centuries stood, and the hours, at even spaces. Young spring was there, wearing a crown of flowers, and naked summer, carrying sheaves of grain, and autumn, stained with trodden grapes, and winter, icy with hoary hair. Phoebus. So yeah, so essentially in this hall, not Beavis, okay, that's fine. So in this hall of the sun god, obviously the sun and the travels of the sun are very important for establishing not only the time of day, but every cycle that builds off of days, right? So that's why he sees days, months, years, centuries, hours, and then of course the seasons, because all of those are dependent on, the sun going around that. Obviously the moon has a part to play too, but yeah, so all of those representations are there hanging out with the sun god. And from their center, the all-seeing sun saw this young man, who trembled at all the strangeness. "Phaethon," he said, "what have you come here for, to this high dwelling? What do you seek, O Phaethon, my son? Undoubtedly my son." And the boy answered, "O common light of the great universe, Phoebus, my father, if I have the right to use that name, and my mother is not lying, to hide some guilt with false pretense, my father, give me a proof, so people will believe me, know me for what I am, and let my mind be free from doubting. Just give me something I can prove to all my friends that you are my dad." And he spoke, or as he spoke, the sun god put off his diadem of light and called him closer and held him fast and said, "My son, you are worthy of acknowledgement. Your mother has told no lies about your birth. To prove it, to make you doubt the less, ask any favor, whatever you will. It surely will be granted. I swear by Styx. I have never seen that river, but no god takes his name in vain, so let him be witness of my promise." So here's some cool things. So first of all, Phaethon, he travels all this way. He gets to the house, this temple of the sun, looks inside, but can't actually look at his father. It's so bright. But then they start talking, and what does Phoebus do? Phoebus takes off a diadem, like a little crown, and then Phaethon is able to look at him. That all the brightness is sort of centered in this diadem that he's wearing. So then he talks to him. He says, "Oh, yes, you are my son. What can I do? I will do anything you want. I promise, and I swear on the river Styx." Now, do you ever swear that you'll do something without knowing exactly what it is that you're going to do. No, that's a bad idea. Don't do that. Don't swear you'll do whatever somebody asks before they ask. As he ended, or even before, the boy asked for the chariot. Control for one day over the winged horses. Too late to take the oath back, but the father repented, having sworn it. Over and over he shook his shining head. Your words, he said, have made mine rash. Could I take back the promise, this is the only thing I would deny you. So let me try persuasion. What you want, my son, is dangerous. You ask for power beyond your strength and years. Your lot is mortal, but what you ask, beyond the lot of mortals. Poor, ignorant boy, you ask for more than gods have any claim on. Each of them may do much as he will, but none of them has power, with one exception, your father, to hold the reins, riding that fiery car. Not even Jove, hurler of the thunderbolts, could drive this chariot, and who is greater than Jove? The road at first is steep, uphill, and the horses hardly make it with all their morning ardor fresh upon them. Then it runs very high across mid-heaven, so very high that I myself am frightened sometimes to see the world so far below me. Later it descends as steeply as it rises, needing the tightest kind of rein. The goddess Tethys, who takes me to her ocean waters, has often feared for me in that downward plunging. To make matters worse, the sky is always whirling with dizzy motion, and the stars wheel with its speed. I make my way against it. I drive against the turning system safely. But you, suppose you had my chariot. Could you keep the wheels steady, fight the spin of the world? Do you think there are cities there and lovely woodlands and temples rich with gifts? No, no, my son, that highway runs through every lurking danger, past fearful monsters. Even on the course, even with no mistake at all, you must pass the bull's lowered horns, the savage archer, the lion open-mouthed, the wicked scorpion curving the sweep of his arms in one direction, the crab another. So he's talking about the constellations, the creatures. And it is not easy to hold those horses, hot with fire and snorting from mouths and nostrils. I can hardly hold them when they warm up for the work and fight the bridle. Beware, my son. I do not want to give you the gift of death. There is time to change your prayer. Of course you want the most convincing proof I am your father. That I give you surely by fearing as I do. I am proved a father by a father's fear. Look at me. You see my face. Would you could see my heart and all the cares held there for you, my son. Or look about you, ask something, anything, from all those riches of heaven, earth, and ocean. You shall have it. Only this one thing do not ask, I beg you. A punishment, not a favor. Silly boy, why put those pleading arms around me? Doubt not it will be given whatever you choose. I swore it. But choose more wisely. That is the end of the gods beseeching, pleading, begging with his son. Anything but this. So yeah, and it's a crazy explanation that he gives about the chariot of the sun. First of all, nobody else, not even Jupiter, has the power and the strength to ride the chariot of the sun through the sky, which is crazy. He says that essentially this will destroy anybody who tries to do it. And then he lists it out. So essentially at first, so it is a chariot, right? So it's a little car essentially attached to horses. So at first, so essentially so you have to think about this in terms of riding a chariot and what the physical exertions would be. but also how the sun works. So essentially, the sunrise is so steep, the horses hardly make it. Then it runs across mid-heaven, which is so high up that even the sun god is afraid looking down because he's so high above the earth. And then as steep as the upward part was, so too is the downward part at the end of day, and it looks like you're going to crash into the ocean. And then you have to fight the spin of the world. There's danger on every side. There are the constellations that are monsters in the sky. And then, of course, there's the fire and the heat that is billowing out from these horses. Yeah, it's not an easy task. And he begs, he pleads with his son, I will do anything. I will give you anything. Any treasure that you can imagine or ask for, I will find and get for you. But a little car attached to horses. Exactly. Yeah, and then, so his warning ended and did no good, as Phaethon insisted on what he first had asked, to drive the chariot. So we're going to pick up, next time we'll hear exactly what the chariot looks like and how it's made. And then there's some really interesting part. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this story, and yes, it does not end well. But we're going to get some interesting depictions of what it means to ride the chariot of the sun. Phoebus is actually going to lay out more of like how it works and what you do in different parts of the journey. And then Phaethon is going to attempt it himself with tragic results. And there will be change, because this is the Metamorphoses, so there will be changes involved in this story. Yeah, so let me know you here in the last couple of minutes here, or you can let me know on the Discord or in Twitter if you are enjoying this. Like I said, I'll try to be a little bit more specific in hitting just the big parts rather than reading all of it. I know not all of it is as interesting as the sort of the action scenes. I can get carried away just reading it because I love it. But yes, more Michael Bay explosions. Oh, we're gonna get some explosions. Definitely gonna see some explosions happening. Cool. So it's the start of the week. What do we have going on today? This afternoon, we'll be continuing Children of Dune over on Jessica's channel, Jessica Nerdy, on Twitch. 5 p.m. Pacific. It's gonna be great. And then most of the usual stuff. I think this week I don't have anything that's preempting anything. Pete and I will not have Myths and Video Games this week. Some other stuff happening is preventing that, but otherwise, okay, cool. All right, good. I'm glad that at least some people are enjoying Ovid. I guess I will try to identify parts that are less interesting that I can skip over and just stick to the really exciting stories. And there are lots of those. It's good. It's good. Thank you for the follow, popping in right here at the end. So yeah, thank you for the resubscribers today. I know I don't usually like focus very much on subscribe and share the channel with people, but that's always good. If you know of anybody who might be interested in the kind of stuff that I'm talking about here or doing on the channel, let them know. September, sure, yeah. Subscriptions are great. Helps pay for all the stuff that we're doing. But yes, thank you everybody for your support. Even if you're just here lurking and listening, I love all of it. I love all of you. Yeah, follow all the Homebuddies. I'm sure there's going to be tons of neat, silly things going on this week. And yeah, we will continue reading Ovid. So we'll do Ovid Mondays and Thursdays, so we can get through the text quicker because there's a lot of it. I think that's about it. Oh yes. So the only other special thing this week is I will be on Warhammer on Hyper again this Thursday. So check that out if you're interested. Thursday night, I think it starts at 6 p.m. Pacific. Yes. Most Homebuddies stuff is at 5 or 7, but this one is at 6. So I'm trying to remember the different time slots. And yes, it'll be with Naeem, and we're gonna introduce. We've slowly been moving. We've been using 9th edition now on Hyper for a while, a couple months, but we've been introducing more and more of the really cool stuff that 9th edition has given us that are new or are really changed. So last week, I helped introduce them to really how to use command points and stratagems, and this week we're going to get into more of the really cool new specific terrain types. So yeah, it should be good. Join for that, and I think that's all I got. Remember to Warhammer. Remember to check out my book, share it. Ooh, what are the examples we got here? Okoye, Alice, and Clara. Very nice. Yeah, all right, that's all I got. So have a great Monday. Join us for Dune later on Jessica's channel. Otherwise, I will see you back here tomorrow for toys. Should be fun. And that's about it. Okay, bye everybody. See ya.